Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from. I'm Ira Feldman. I'm the MEPTEC Executive Director and would like to welcome you to today's Semiconductor Industry Speaker Series hosted by MEPTEC and IMAPS. Our next presenter in the series will be Professor Kurnick from the Microelectronic Engineering Education Department at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and we'll talk about a model for semiconductor workforce development. So it should be a very interesting presentation. That will be on March 9th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Please sign up at MEPTEC.org. We'll also be sending out some emails, or you can use the QR code here to register for that. So Wednesday, March 9th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific. And then please also mark your calendars, and you can actually register today at events.meptec.org or from the MEPTEC homepage. The next Road to Chiplets event will be the mornings of March 15th and 16th on heterogeneous integration and testability, discussing best known methods for doing so. So please join us then. And then for those of you who are unaware, MEPTEC is a membership-supported organization, so we appreciate people being members, and you can join and renew at MEPTEC.org, or if your company is in a position or interested in sponsoring, please let us know. This enables us to put the highest quality events together and make many of them, like the Semiconductor Industry Speaker Series, available free of charge. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Julia Goldstein, who's going to talk about the role of semiconductor packaging in the drive towards sustainability, words and action. It's my pleasure to introduce Julia, who's a longtime friend and college classmate of mine from Harvey Mudd, and she started her journey in the area of material science and was a process development engineer for many years before switching her full-time focus to journalism. She's been a technical editor of several magazines, and she also was on the MEPTEC advisory board previously. And currently she runs her own organization that focuses on technical marketing, content, and consulting to manufacturing companies. And she was also one of the presenters at our luncheon in October of 2019, where she was talking about greening of the semiconductor manufacturing process or manufacturing industry. So she'll continue more about that. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Julia.
So this is to some extent a continuation of what I was talking about in October 2019, but things have changed. This topic that I'm talking about applies to really every industry. And when it comes to semiconductor packaging, sometimes the question is your company part of the problem? And I'm sorry to say that the answer is yes. You can also be part of the solution. And I hope you really want to. So I'm here to tell you that what you do matters, and so does what you say. Here's the outline of my presentation. And I'm going to be presenting general information and also give examples of what some specific companies are doing. I don't think I need to tell you that the climate is changing. I don't think I need to tell you that people and companies are responsible for it. I think you know that. So what I really want to say is that we need climate action now, and it's part of your job in the semiconductor packaging industry to consider the environmental impact when you're making decisions. And that may be decisions about design, materials, logistics, a lot of different kind of things. So the idea is that manufacturing is really a key component. That yes, what individuals do matters, but we've got to get all sorts of manufacturing industries to step up. And one of the ideas is the triple bottom line, right? Companies just look at the financials. They look at the bottom line. They've done that historically. Business is in business to make money. However, the triple bottom line considers people, planet, and profit. The idea that you need all these three things to be in balance. And if we want to continue functioning as a society, we've got to have that. And the other piece of that message is, if you're not leading the charge and you don't get involved pretty soon, that you're going to get left behind. So I said I was going to give examples of companies. Now, I live about 2 miles from the main campus of Microsoft. I'm in Bellevue, Washington. Back in, I believe it was March 7th, 2020, Microsoft announced that all the employees were supposed to go and work from home until March 25th. Now, what they didn't say was they meant March 25th, 2022. Anyway, they've recently announced that they will be reopening all of their campuses by the end of the month. And in that discussion, they're talking about the public health impacts, and they'll make sure that they'll look at COVID cases and all that stuff. But there's also a sustainability aspect. Now, for me personally, I've really appreciated the reduced traffic on the 520 freeway and on the city streets. If I worked for Microsoft, I would bike to work. So I hope that when they do open the campuses, that they will do more of embracing that kind of hybrid model where people can go into work when they need to and work from home otherwise, because we've shown that people can do that. Now, when you come to a company like Microsoft, certainly commuting isn't the only or the biggest aspect, but it's part of it. So Microsoft is leading in a lot of ways. So one thing is carbon neutral data centers, which again, some of it is kind of how they're calculating things, but it's still moving in the right direction, because as we know, the internet is not climate or energy neutral. Microsoft powers all its buildings by 100% renewables. They have a goal to be water positive by 2030. And what that means is that they bring more water in than they take out. So that involves a lot of reuse of water and also contributing to projects that will help conserve water in various places around the world. And then it's also just kind of looking at their products from the whole life cycle, from making them, use, recycling, looking at e-waste, improving recyclable packaging, a lot of little things that can add up. Whoops, what just happened? Sorry. So now Apple. And I actually don't own any Apple devices. I have a Samsung phone. And when I replaced my 2015 phone last year, I thought about getting an Apple phone. And I thought about that because Apple is doing a better job of using more recycled materials. They have a huge program to do that. And they've listed all the elements there in blue in that periodic table are the ones that Apple is focusing on how they can get more recycled content and do less mining. So that could be a whole long topic to discuss. But the idea is they're making progress. Now, I didn't actually buy an iPhone because at the store they said, well, you've already have this Samsung phone. It would be all your apps, everything would be different. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll get the Samsung phone. And, Samsung needs to step it up too. But in any case, I think Apple is doing some things right. And they made a pretty audacious claim back in 2017 about this goal to use no mined metals at all in their products. Now, there's still, as far as I know, no timeline for that. But again, sometimes it starts with words, with saying, this is what we're going to do, and then trying to figure out a way to make it happen. Intel has announced a bunch of 2030 goals. Again, net positive water use, something that I mentioned with Microsoft also. They're not yet powering all of their facilities with renewables, but they want to do that. They have an intention to do that. And to become zero waste to landfill. And we'll get into that a little bit with one of my other examples. An interesting thing here, I talk about absolute emissions reductions. And that's a critical piece. Intel's goal is a 10% reduction in absolute greenhouse gas emissions from 2020 to 2030. And 10% might not sound like a lot, but part of the problem in using metrics that measure emissions intensity, like intensity per $1 million of revenue or per device produced, is that when you're growing and producing more devices or acquiring more companies, your total emissions are rising. And so we're still having that negative effect on the planet, even if it's lower emissions per chip. So the real challenge and difficulty is to find ways to reduce the total absolute emissions. Which leads into my next topic.
But Julia, before you go there, with the different goals, I mean, different companies phrase them differently, or, I mean, is there a standard framework for the goals that definitions are well defined, or do the companies first have to define them and then maybe tweak them based upon what they think is achievable or what their marketing departments would like? I mean, how much, nutritional labels on food here in the US are pretty standardized. So there's not a lot of cheating there, but when I hear some of these goals, I wonder how much of it is subject to gamemanship.
Less than it used to be. The GRI standards for reporting have gotten more stringent with the latest version that came out in 2018, that companies can't do as much of just highlighting the areas where they're doing well and not talking about the areas where they fall behind. They have to report on everything. However, they're doing it in 100-page reports, or sometimes even longer, and not everybody's reading all the details. And the other thing about like emissions intensity versus absolute emissions, they need to report on both. But there's a variety in how they can choose the intensity, right? Per revenue, per chip, per whatever. So they have some flexibility with those metrics. They can also choose the baseline year. And especially with when so much manufacturing shut down in 2020, there's definitely a sense of we're going to need a little asterisk for people's performance in 2020 and 2021. So there's, like I said, there's progress, but there's still wiggle room and a need to look deeper.
Yeah, and maybe you should introduce GRI just so that people who aren't familiar with them.
Yes, and I think I took out that slide. So it's the Global Reporting Institute, and the GRI standards are one of the main frameworks for companies that do sustainability reporting. So if you look up sustainability reports for companies, there should be a statement that they are done in accordance with the GRI standards. And they're starting to put out sector-specific standards for particular industries. And the initial ones are oil and gas, coal, mining, the ones that are just the highest impact. But electronics is coming down the line.
Thank you.
So looking at overall greenhouse gas emissions, and these are data from 2017, the overall US EPA doesn't, they take a while to put data out, let's just say that. So here it is for various different categories. And I would say that the semiconductor industry has emissions in nearly all these categories, probably with the exception of agriculture. So it's part of industry, which includes things like making steel, aluminum, cement, various different chemicals. And there was I think an article that I looked at from 2021 that said industry was actually 27%. In any case, the ultimate goal should be net zero emissions. And again, there's flexibility in how you calculate that. So there's reducing how much emissions you're generating, but there's also offsets where companies are buying carbon offsets. They're investing in projects that are going to help reduce emissions. And so they can kind of count that. So it can feel a little bit like a shell game, but the idea is they're being forced to make these investments. And so the technology can move forward. Now, emissions are divided into 3 primary scopes. And scope 1 is company-owned emissions. What's coming from your factories, your facilities, your fabs. This is where the company has direct control over what it's doing. And this is where, this is where a lot of companies are achieving reductions. Again, whether it's in absolute or it's in emissions intensity, they can work to achieve those reductions. Scope 2 is about energy. We talked about companies getting 100% of their energy from renewable sources. Now, once you have 100% of your energy from renewables, you can't really reduce further. Scope 3 is the supply chain. That's the biggest challenge. So supply chain is really everything from extracting materials, right? Mining, using fossil fuels to produce plastics, where you get those materials, to what happens to your products once they're shipped, the consumer has them, or the customer, right? Maybe your customer, because you're building something that's going to end up in a computer or a cell phone. And what happens when those end products are disposed of? So the thing with scope 3 is it's really hard to get your arms around it. Around how do you include everything? How do you even find the data? And how do you track it so you don't count it twice? So it's a little bit tricky. Well, it's a lot tricky. So here's an example from Apple in how they describe their scope 3 reach, that it covers materials, assembly, recycling, retail, components, shipping, and there's even more things, but 6 is enough and it kind of fits nicely on the slide. They screen suppliers to see how they're doing in their social and environmental performance. They have guidelines. They do assessments. If suppliers don't meet the guidelines, they have an opportunity to take corrective action. And if they don't or can't do that, then they might not be suppliers anymore. So that's really the risk from the point of view of the suppliers, is if you want the business of those large OEMs, you've got to step up. So now we get into what suppliers can do. So your role depends on your position in the supply chain. And another thing that comes out in these sustainability reports is the idea of materiality. meaning what is material to your business, what is really important to what you do, that it impacts your business and it impacts society and the planet, that's where you need to focus the most difference. That's where you need to focus your efforts to make the greatest difference. So here's some examples. Things like sustainable chemistry. What are you making chemicals from? What's the process look like? Do you have toxic products in there? How are you handling the wastewater? If you're a company that makes process chemicals, then that is a big, important aspect to consider. Energy consumption, both from what you make and how it's used. Can you make something that helps a computer run more efficiently and reduce its energy consumption? Can you run your processes at a lower temperature while still maintaining quality and reliability? And of course, resource use and reuse. I talked about zero waste to landfill, which we'll get into in an example that I'm going to show in a moment. But really looking at how you think about waste. And are there ways that things cannot become waste? They can be reused. You can buy less of it to begin with. So there's a lot of different opportunities and creative thinking that can go into reducing your resource use and smarter waste management. And yield improvement is also a piece. The less stuff you scrap, the less resources you waste in making the products in the first place. You can improve efficiency, you can improve yield, and you can improve your environmental footprint. And there's also opportunities at the design phase to design for repairability or to design to use less energy. There's a lot of ways that suppliers can be more environmentally sustainable. I'm going to give a couple examples now. So one is BREWER Science, and they make a variety of coatings, sensors, bonding materials for wafer level packaging. They have earned the Green Circle certification for zero waste to landfill. They just recently announced now 7 years running. And what this means is that none of their hazardous or non-hazardous waste goes to a landfill. It gets reused. They've got a whole process to reuse solvents. It gets recycled, or in some cases, it's waste to energy, which is kind of it shouldn't be a first approach. But if you can use waste to energy within your own facility so that the energy burned from the waste materials powers your own equipment and factories, then that can work very well as part of an overall zero waste to landfill process. Another big thing, I don't know if you all saw in the news, that in 2021, BREWER Science became a certified B Corporation. I don't have time to get into all the details of B Corp certification. I've got a link in a resources slide that I'm going to share later. But it requires continuous improvement. It requires companies to go through a very stringent process to qualify. And then they have to continually improve to re-qualify every 3 years. And there's social, environmental, a whole lot of different aspects that a company needs to meet to do that. And so far, BREWER Science is the only company in this industry that has become a B Corp. And I'm not telling you your company should become a B Corp, but it's something that's worth knowing about and considering, might that be an approach? And here's another example, SMIC, which was one of 7 companies to win Intel's Supplier Continuous Quality Improvement Award, which is kind of their gold award for suppliers, in 2020. And they make a variety of solders, many lead-free solders, but also some leaded solders. And they are really moving toward emphasizing lower temperature solders. Anyway, when we went to lead-free solder back because of RoHS, that of course required higher processing temperatures. And I won't get into that whole story because I could spend an hour talking about that. But going towards reliable, highly reliable solders that can be processed at lower temperatures is part of the picture. And here I say a member of RBA and RMI. RBA is the Responsible Business Alliance, and RMI is the Responsible Minerals Initiative. So the Responsible Business Alliance, here are just a few of the members, and they have a code of conduct that they all have to agree to abide by, and it requires them to be socially and environmentally responsible. This conduct covers labor practices, employee health and safety, pollution, waste management, and a lot more. And there are OEMs that will prioritize suppliers that are members of the RBA. And then the Responsible Minerals Initiative is a subset of that deals with avoiding conflict minerals. So minerals that are made in war-torn regions of the country where there are horrible labor violations, children working in mines. It's actually really frightening. And the idea is conflict-free minerals that don't have that. Now it's, again, a long, difficult story on how to avoid that, but it's becoming a little bit easier. I mentioned matching words and actions, that words and actions matter at the beginning of my talk. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about communication. So what you say matters. And here's just a couple of quotes we have from Intel. Our commitment to positive global impact is embedded in our purpose to create technology that enriches the lives of every person on Earth. That sounds nice. Or from Flex, we weave sustainability into our day-to-day operations, not only because it is good for business, but also because it is the right thing to do. So some of these statements, maybe they're just sort of feel good, and saying you're responsible and acting like it are two very different things. But the words are still an important first step. And sometimes the words go further. Microsoft has said they intend to remove all the carbon that they have emitted since their founding. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they're going to go about doing that. But again, that's where sort of leading with the words, with direct statements and strong goals that you publicly state are a way to say, okay, now we've got to make sure that our actions match that, because people's expectations are going to be high. So where does your company stand? Where are you in this sustainability journey? And what do you envision? Do you have 2030 goals for sustainability? Do you have a plan to get there? And starting that conversation, if you haven't already, inside your company is a great first step. So I like to divide a company's sustainability communication journey, which is, again, kind of parallel to the overall sustainability strategy development, into 5 stages. And at stage 1, I call unaware. Sustainability is not even something that is talked about at the company. It's not something that employees really connect to their job. There's nothing on the company's website or in their press releases or in any of their public statements that says that sustainability is in any way connected to what they do. Several years ago, many more companies were at this stage 1. And now fewer are, but still a lot of companies haven't yet done anything to incorporate sustainability. But at stage 2, the awareness is starting to build. The idea that, wait a minute, maybe we ought to do something. There might be some initial discussions about it. And then stage 3 is where the company is definitely aware that they need sustainability to be a higher priority in how they do business. There is a sustainability page on the company website. Now, I happen to know, because I look at a lot of websites, that sometimes it's really hard to find. And ideally, it should be easier. If people are looking to have that information to say, where do you stand? It should be out there. But it also needs to be talked about inside the company, and employees need to be aware. So at this stage 3, the employees are starting to be aware. I was thinking about somebody I talked with, and she says, oh, I know that one of the 5 pillars that my company is committed to is sustainability. She said, I'm not quite sure who's in charge of that, but I do know that it's on the radar. So her company is probably at this stage 3 point. And then at stage 4, they become more involved. All the employees are very well aware of what's going on. The internal and external communications are progressing in a way that says sustainability matters. It's a top priority. Our customers, our suppliers, they can see what we're doing. Our employees know that we believe it's important. And stage 5 is really the industry leaders who are fully engaged, who are leading the way for their industry and are in a position to help their suppliers and their peers and competitors advance as well. Now, even these stage 5 companies are certainly not doing things perfectly. Nobody is. But they know what they need to do to continue to improve and to continue to make goals that are even more stringent, where they say, okay, our 2020 goals were this, we achieved it, or we fell behind. They're also honest communication is a really tricky thing. But the companies who are doing the best job are being more transparent about it.
With the transparency, is there any reports, comparative benchmarking between these companies? I mean, you talked about the standardized definitions and things like that, but can you look at company A versus company B in the different areas, or would somebody have to manually go do that analysis?
You kind of have to manually do it. It's not like there's an easy, quick scoring report card. There are places you can look. But also it can sometimes be hard to know what's really happening inside the company without talking to the employees. But what you see externally, if you're going to the website, if you're talking with some representatives, can give a reasonable sense about what's happening inside the company. Although, I have seen situations where people said, my company's a leader in this, I didn't know.
Got it.
As I said, the communication needs to start from within. It also needs to start with the leaders. If the CEO is not committed to making sustainability a top priority, manager level employees are going to have a really hard time making progress. So that's about, communicating the policy and implementing it in a way that everybody can participate. So it goes from the top down, but it also goes from the bottom up. And employees can have knowledge and agency. Now, I mentioned BREWER Science, earlier. They've got a great blog. I recommend taking a look at their company website and subscribing to their blog. But in a blog post just yesterday, Tom Brown, the executive director of manufacturing quality and logistics, wrote about employee engagement. And he said, leadership isn't about giving or granting authority. It's about expecting each individual to own the solutions. And that's where this bit about giving the employees the agency to make suggestions and to feel like management is actually going to listen. When they say, look, we have this problem, we're wasting water here, I think there's a better way to do it, that they listen. Even when maybe sometimes the suggestion might be, we're going to go with a different supplier that's more expensive. So once the communication pathways are open within the company, then there's an opportunity to share the messages more widely within your sector, within peers, and sometimes industry associations can really be helpful with that kind of networking. And the idea that we're working together to solve common problems. And there may be areas where the companies compete, but it shouldn't be about the environment. If everybody improves, everybody wins. And again, working with the supply chain to engage customers and suppliers and give them the tools that they need to make smart decisions, to become preferred suppliers, and to really drive change throughout an industry. And it's not an easy process. Oops, just a minute. Sorry. So again, one of the things I like to talk about is consistent messaging, making the internal and external communications match. So the public and customer perception of your company is based on external communications, what they see on your website, product branding, and that kind of thing. But that should reflect what's going on inside the company. And the communication should lead to changes in policies and practices. That's the idea of putting them into action, not just talking about it. So, what messages are you distributing inside your company? Are they the messages that sustainability matters every day for employees in every department, no matter what? Or is it, well, once a quarter, we're going to go do a beach cleanup? I went and switched slides a little too quickly earlier. I've got a workshop coming up in just 2 days, so I wanted to mention it here. That's called How to Quickly Build a Sustainability Team That Inspires Action. And this is geared toward people who are leading a sustainability team or initiative at their company. They might be the chief sustainability officer or sustainability director, or they could be working in operations, marketing, risk management, other areas, and sustainability is part of their job. They're developing goals, and they want some help in building a team that's going to really help them get there and achieve the goals that they want to achieve. So as I said, this workshop is happening in just 2 days. And if you want more information, there is a link there. I said I would give you some resources. So this is, Ira, you had asked about GRI, so Global Reporting Initiative. There is a link to that. I talked about B Corp certification and the Green Circle Zero Waste to Landfill. So there are, and also links to the Responsible Business Alliance and Minerals initiatives. And then there's the American Sustainable Business Network. They actually do a lot of work with the governments in this country and working on legislation that supports more responsible business objectives. And my company is actually a member of that organization. And here is how you can connect with me if you I will put a link in the chat to the contact form. And if you send in that contact form, then I will send you a copy of the slides today. And I know they will eventually be up on the MEPTEC website, but if you want to see them today, I will put that link into the chat. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Julia. So let's do some questions and answers. Please, if there's questions, put them in the Q&A tool below in the Q&A window. Please put them in there. I will ask them at the appropriate time. So one of the questions you touched upon, or one of the issues you touched upon, is possibly changing suppliers for finding a supplier who's more, let's say, green or more energy efficient. But there might be a cost to doing that. So how do companies balance the bottom line versus being green? I mean, do they have a budget for it, or do they say, well, if we're 1% more green, we'll spend 1% more on our cost side? I mean, someday this calculation, it would be nice if the calculation didn't have to be done, but I suspect that it is done. So
yeah,
how do they figure that out?
Yeah, in an extreme example where, okay, if I go to a completely some bio-based material instead of one based on fossil fuels, I will kill all my profit. Okay, well, maybe that's extreme. And then if you can't just suddenly do that and bring, some product down to zero profit. But in reality, I think the key is really to look long-term, which means not just what is it going to cost me this month or this quarter to buy product A versus product B from these different suppliers, but what is the long-term view? What, for example, you might be able to save water or energy by going with the greener supplier. There's also the intangibles, like company reputation. There might be potential customers that are going to force your hand, that are going to only buy from the responsible suppliers. So that will force more of the suppliers to become more responsible. But from the point of view, if you're bringing in a supplier, you can also affect that by choosing those. And even if it means investing a little bit in the short run, and also the costs of some of those materials that are more expensive right now are going to eventually come down.
If there's a market and demand.
I know. That's maybe a broad thing. It's not always going to happen, but that is the general trend. If it feels like it's more of a niche thing and there's not that much available, that's the other thing, is availability, right? Maybe the greener supplier can't produce as much of whatever it is as you need. Then you can still buy from them for whatever small percentage of what you're doing, and then try to support them to help that grow in the future.
Right. And unfortunately, you said, some of these are long-term things, but, many companies are still short-term focused, especially on the financials. So it's how they make the mind shift is probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah. And I think it's also looking at the risk management there. And to some degree, that also depends on whether you're a public or a private company. For public companies, the investors are starting to look at this. If, the people are just look at the finances, well, hello, your share price is going to drop. If that's really, all they care about. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll paraphrase the next question. So there's a cost for, you know, and so obviously the physical world, like printed magazines and printed ads, and there's there's an environmental impact of producing them, and a lot of things have switched, obviously to the electronic email and things like that, and there is a cost associated with email. There's probably some greenhouse emission. The question gives a value. I don't know if it's accurate or not. So, but there's an environmental impact for doing email or doing something on the web. Should we be concerned as consumers as to the environmental impact of our activity? The cloud to most of us is amorphous. We don't pay the bill for operating it, but there's an electricity bill, there's a emission bill, and obviously the social media companies, their objective as a business is to get us to do more and more. But should we be worried about the environmental impact of us watching cat videos that might not have much social redeeming value other than pure enjoyment? I mean,
yeah, you got to stop those cat videos, Ira. No. I would say, yes, there's an opportunity to become more aware of that. And there is some information out there that talks about it, but I've also, the trend toward giving people as much data as they could possibly want, right? For $10 a month, you can have this tiny amount of data, but for $20 a month, you can have unlimited. And so be like, oh, I want the unlimited data. I remember years ago when I had my Yahoo email and it said you could only have, I don't remember what the number was, but there was some like data cap. And so like, ooh, I've got to delete and get rid of those old emails because I'm going to run up against this data cap. Well, now there's not there. I could have 50,000 emails and nobody's going to tell me I can't. And so, buy more well, maybe storage should cost more, but people start thinking, well, oh, no, I don't want that. But maybe it will force people to either get rid of that stuff they're not using, or pay for the privilege of having more. So that's an interesting, I don't know the answer to what the model should be, but I do think that building the awareness is something that there's definitely an opportunity to do that.
So I mean, I've seen airlines, when you book a ticket, they say, oh, for $3.50, you can buy carbon credits to offset your carbon footprint. Maybe Meta and LinkedIn and Google should say, hey, your carbon footprint is this, and maybe that would be a start, telling you what your carbon footprint is and the use of their activity, and maybe giving you an option to offset it. But I think
but then
that's atypical to their business model.
Yeah, they're asking the customer to pay for that. But of course, have them pay for that. Then they don't want you to use the thing less. Although it's interesting with the utility companies, they charge, right? They charge a base rate if you use so many kilowatt hours. And then if you use more, it costs extra. So they're encouraging people to conserve. That you could do something, could be possible to do something similar with data.
But I think the challenge of the companies we just talked about is that we are not the customer. If we're not paying for it, we're not the customer. Mm-hmm. The customers are the people who are buying the data that we're generating on these services. So unless you're paying for like Google Business Suite, you're not the customer. Your Gmail that they're providing free, you are the product. The data you generate is the product. So, and that may be the other issue there. But back on the supply chain, it's with companies wanting their supply chain to be greener. how much of it can be achieved through fiat saying, yes, you need to be greener, versus how many of the companies are really helping their suppliers be greener, giving them the resources? Because some of the large companies have much larger scale of operations. They can afford the research, or they can afford to negotiate better, let's say, greener power or cleaner materials and things like that. I mean, so how much is just being dictated versus how much is being enabled by the companies doing these sustainability and green reports and things?
Well, I think that sharing data and information is definitely part of it, saying, here's what we expect. But I do believe that, yes, giving companies tools is also important, because, and some of that, like, I think one example is like the corrective action thing, right? Okay, we want you to meet this level, right? You're only here, but here's what you can do to reach this greater level so you can be one of our preferred suppliers. And those kinds of programs seem like, that's definitely a way that can be a help. Okay, I see a thing.
Okay. So thank you, Julia. There's a request. Could you put the link to your workshop in the chat also? Somebody did ask for that just now.
Great, I will do that.
Yeah. I thank you. I think this is a very important topic. I thank you for sharing additional information. And as you've said, not just how we communicate about it, but communication is important to make a difference. But we got to start with the awareness. And I think this is a great presentation for making people aware. So thank you very much. So I'd like to remind people that our next presentation on the Semiconductor Industry Speaker Series, Professor Kernick from Rochester Institute of Technology will be talking about a model for workforce development for the semiconductor industry on March 9th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific. We will be sending out emails, but we will also have a link. Well, you can use the QR code here, or it will be up on the MEPTEC website next week also. So you can register to join us for that. And then the next event will be the Road to Chiplets, Heterogeneous Integration Testability on March 15th through 16th, the mornings of those days. You can register for that now. This is a free virtual workshop. You can register at events.meptec.org, or you'll find a link on our homepage. So I look forward to seeing people for that event. If you have any questions, let me know. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today and look forward to seeing you at a future MEPTEC event. So thank you and have a good day.